All right. I want to start with a little survey this morning. And you don't have to raise your hand if you don't want to. But how many of you are the oldest sibling in your family? Oldest sibling. Oh, okay. Quite a few. Me too. I'm an oldest sibling. How many of you are the youngest sibling in your family? Okay, youngest. And how many of you are somewhere in between? Middle sibling. Okay. I'm sorry. Marsha. Okay. That's a Gen X joke. All right. I want to ask the oldest siblings, how many of you hated it when a younger sibling in some way outshone you, right? Or got to do something first that you never got to do? Raise your hand if you did not enjoy that. Yes. If you're a younger sibling, did you enjoy it? Yes. Right? There's something for the older siblings that's like, it's just not right, right? And for younger siblings, including middle siblings who have older and or younger siblings, right? Right? It's like, oh yeah, it should be this. Like I should get to do this first or whatever, right? There's an overturning that in some ways doesn't feel right, but gosh, it just feels so right, right? Okay, now here's a question. And this is maybe directed more towards the younger siblings, the ones who have older siblings. What if it was illegal to do or have certain things before your older siblings? Oh. What if it was illegal for younger siblings to learn to ride a bike before the older sibling does? What if it was illegal for a younger sibling to go out on a first date before the older sibling does? What if it was illegal for a younger sibling to get a job before the older sibling does? What if it was illegal for a younger sibling to get married before an older sibling does, or to get to become retired, right? To retire before an older sibling does? Does that sound fair? No. Right? Because what if your older sibling doesn't want to do some of those things? They never do. And then you never get to do some of those things, right? That's not fair. Okay, so we're going to talk about the fairness, unfairness of older, younger. There's a weird dynamic there between older, younger. We're going to look at a tale of two brothers in this story, a heel grabber and a stew sipper. That's the kind of title that's supposed to make you go, well, that's weird. I wonder what that's all about. Okay, we'll find out. Okay, so we're going to talk about two brothers, Jacob and Esau. Some of you guys have heard of these guys before. The story that we're looking at today comes after the death of Abraham. So we've spent a long time looking at the life of Abraham. Abraham has now passed away. And so before we get into today's story, let me just kind of tie a bow on the life of Abraham. And just read you a short paragraph here about his death. So this is chapter 25, Genesis 25, starting in verse 7. Abraham lived 175 years. You can take that literally or figuratively, or it just means he lived a really long time. That's how I kind of take it. Then Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age, an old man and full of years. And he was gathered to his people. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah near Mamre in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, the field Abraham had bought from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with his wife Sarah. After Abraham's death, God blessed his son Isaac, who then lived near Be'er Lahai Roi. Now, just one quick thing that I love about this little account of the death of Abraham is that both Isaac and Ishmael come together, right? And I don't know if there was still tension between them or conflict. And when you read the story, there's never any direct conflict or tension between Ishmael and Isaac, but there was certainly like family tension around those two sons. But here they are after their dad has passed away, and they just want to honor their dad together because they love their dad, right? And perhaps there has been full reconciliation, or maybe they're just like, hey, it's great to see you again. Okay, bye. I don't know. But I love that they come together to lay their father to rest. Okay, so now at this point, Isaac has become the father of the family, right? In the line of Abraham that God had promised would lead to a nation that would be a blessing to all the peoples of the earth. That means that Isaac now needs children. But Isaac doesn't have any children yet. So he ends up having two sons, Jacob and Esau. And the story from here on actually becomes the story of Jacob. So let me just give you a quick little preview on who Jacob is, and then we'll get into it. So Jacob eventually has 12 sons himself, and those 12 sons become the fathers of the 12 tribes of Israel. Right? So the people of Israel are basically the direct descendants of Jacob. Now, why aren't they the 12 tribes of Jacob? Well, because there's a story, and we'll get to that probably early next year, where God changes Jacob's name to Israel. And there's a fascinating story even behind the meaning of the name Israel, and we'll get to that. But God changes his name to Israel, and so his descendants become the nation of Israel. Now, I just for a little bit of clarity, I think it's important to acknowledge that the ancient people of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel, is not exactly the same thing as the modern nation state of Israel. There's a distinction there, right? What we have today is a country made up of people who are, for sure, many of them descendants of Jacob, descendants of Israel. But it's a modern sort of construction by Western civilization after World War II, and we said, okay, here's this group of people. Not exactly the same thing as the ancient 12 tribes of Israel. And we actually even see it subtly in the way that we refer to modern day, residents of Israel and ancient people of Israel. Modern day residents of Israel are called what? Israelis, right? And it uses sort of the modern convention of people of the Middle East, Iraqi, Kuwaiti, Saudi, Israeli, right? But when you look at the ancient people of Israel, we call them what? Israelites, right? Which uses the more ancient convention, Hittites, Edomites, right? Whatever-ites, right? Lots of ites in the old ancient world. So anyway, so there's a difference. So that I just want to say that. Is there any overlap? Yeah, there's some overlap, but it's not exactly the same thing. Okay, that's more of an aside than anything else. Okay, so now we're going to talk about these two sons of Isaac, Jacob and Esau, and the passage is divided into two parts. The first part is the brother's birth. The second part is the brother's bargain. All right, so we're going to talk about the brother's birth first. And let me just say, I don't know, I feel like I need to say this. This was a hard passage to write a sermon about this week. Sometimes it's super easy. It's like, oh man, I know exactly what I want to say about this. This one is like, I don't know what to say about this one. But I have something to say. Don't worry. I don't know. I just feel like I need to say that. Okay. It took some thinking. Anyway, okay. So here we go. This is the account, verse 19. This is the account of the family line of Abraham's son Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean from Paddan Aram, and sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." Okay, a couple of things about this opening part here. So the story starts with barrenness, right? Rebekah is childless, and we've seen that, right? Sarah has been barren, and this theme of barrenness is something that comes up over and over and over in the Bible, in the Old Testament and into the New Testament. Now, barrenness is a biological thing, but when we read about it in the Bible, it's more of a theological thing. It's meant to remind us that God is a God who brings life out of emptiness. God brings life out of death. That when there is nothing there, God can bring something good. When there is no hope, there can be hope. When there is no peace, there can be peace. When there's no joy, there can be joy. That's the theme of barrenness. Now, it's not the main theme of this story, which is why it basically just has one line about it, right? She's barren, and then he prays, and then she's not. Okay, and so then she becomes pregnant, not with one baby, but with two babies. And these babies are something else. Right? It said the babies jostled each other within her. They're already fighting with each other before they're even born. And it's so intense. I don't know what it's like to have a baby inside of me. Many of you do. I know what it's like to feel a baby kick from the outside. Some of you guys know what it's like from the inside. But to have them fighting, I don't know what that's like. But she's overwhelmed by this, and out of like frustration, and she's exasperated, she cries out, "Why is this happening to me?" And then God answers her. Let me just read to you again what God says. "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." How do you like that, older siblings? The older will serve the younger. I want to introduce you to a word, or maybe you know this word already. Let's go to the next slide here. Primogeniture. Anybody know this word? This is a word that refers to, let me read to you. It's a social or legal custom in which the firstborn child, usually the firstborn son, inherits all or most of the parent's estate. Right? You've heard of this. This has been a practice throughout history where the oldest child gets everything and the younger children maybe get some scraps or maybe have to live, under the beneficence of the oldest child. And we don't really practice that officially in our culture. We do see it in the world, right? There's a reason why William is going to be the next king and not Harry. It's not because William's going to be a better king or was trained better or has more skills of kingliness, right? He just got born first, right? Harry might be the better king, but he got born second, so he's not going to be the king, right? So that's primogeniture. In the ancient world, there were reasons for it. I mean, it's not like it wasn't for nothing. There are advantages to keeping wealth and power consolidated, right? If you start splitting up your wealth and your land, your family eventually becomes weaker and weaker and weaker until it's kind of like a nothing. If you want to maintain prestige of your family, keep wealth consolidated. So that's kind of what's behind the practice of primogeniture. But it's not like it was fair, right? It's not like the firstborn son, or sometimes it's the firstborn daughter. That it's called absolute primogeniture when it's the firstborn child. Actually, the British monarchy is an absolute primogeniture where Queen Elizabeth was the firstborn child, so she became queen, right? It's not fair. I mean, it's just kind of a thing that people decided to do. And that was the practice in the ancient world, right? The older never serves the younger. The younger always serves the older. And God says, these two babies that are inside of you, the older one is going to serve the younger. Scandalous. What? How is that going to happen? How is that going to happen? Okay, so now comes the actual birth of the babies. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb, fraternal twins, you'll see. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. All right, so Esau is born. We're told that he's red, whatever that means. We're actually going to come back to that. He's hairy, meaning whatever. As far as babies go, he had more hair than most babies, I guess. And so they name him Esau. Why do they name him Esau? Because the name Esau means hairy. So his name's Harry, right? Jacob is born, and we're told that he is born grasping Esau's heel. Now, I'm not... I think it happened, but it's weird. It's like almost like a fable or something. Like there's some whimsy about this story, right? Where a baby is reaching and grasping the heel, right? As though he's saying, no, let me out first, right? He's grasping the heel of Esau. And so they name him Jacob. Why do they name him Jacob? Because Jacob means he grasps the heel. That's what his name means. Now, here's the interesting thing about the name Jacob. Jacob is an idiom for something else. You know what an idiom is? An idiom is an expression, a grouping of words that means something different than what the words themselves seem to indicate that they mean. For instance, we have many idioms in English. To hit the nail on the head. Man, you really hit the nail on the head with that. That doesn't mean you actually had a hammer and a nail and you hit it on the head. It means that you were exactly right about that thing that you just said, right? To break the ice, right? oh man, it was so tense, and then someone came and they broke the ice. It doesn't mean that they started crushing ice cubes, right? It means that they, initiated conversation or kind of eased the tension in that social situation. When we say, oh man, I had another one. What was it? It was a good one. Oh, piece of cake, right? We say, man, that test was a piece of cake. Doesn't mean it was actually like red velvet or, chocolate or something. It means that it was super easy, right? These are idioms that the words themselves don't seem to represent the meaning that they have. So he grasps the heel. To grasp the heel was an idiom, a grouping of words that means something other than simply grasping the heel. In Hebrew, grasping the heel, he grasps the heel meant he deceives. It was an idiom for deception. A heel grasper was a deceiver, right? So there's a double meaning in the name Jacob, and what we will see is that absolutely captures the kind of person that Jacob was. He was cunning, he was clever, he was a deceiver. He was not a likable person. He's not the kind of guy that I would want to be friends with. And then as we go, we'll see what. And he becomes the father of the people of God? What? There's this weird tension. And I think Genesis is intentionally saying, yeah, there's a tension here. God uses people who are very imperfect to bring goodness and healing and blessing into the world. And I think there's a subtle nod to the idea that if God can do that through someone as awful as Jacob, as we will see, he can do something good through us. Okay, so Jacob is born, Esau is born, they grow up, and they become young adults. So now we're moving into the bargain. We talked about the brother's birth, now we're going to talk about the brother's bargain. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And that favoritism is going to come back to bite them next week. You'll find out. Okay, but very different, these two boys, right? Esau is a man's man. He's hairy, he's muscular, probably. It doesn't say that, but I imagine him being kind of muscular. He's, his skin is tanned and weather-worn because he's a hunter, and he spends weeks out in the open country, maybe months, and he eats the food that he kills, right? That's the kind of guy that Esau is. Jacob is not a man's man. He likes to stay home. He likes to chill in the tent. He likes to cook, as we will see in a moment here, right? Very different, these two brothers. So one day, this happens. Verse 29. Once, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew." There's that word red again. Interesting. We'll come back to that. "I'm famished." That is why he was called Edom. Jacob replied, "First sell me your birthright." "Look, I'm about to die," Esau said. "What good is the birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. Oh, man. Okay. So what the heck do you do with that story, right? This was my conundrum this week. What do you, there's nothing good about this story, right? Are we supposed to follow Jacob's example, cheat your brothers and friends out of their stuff? Or are you supposed to follow Esau's example, where you just sort of live for the moment? What are we supposed to learn from this? Walter Brueggemann, my favorite Old Testament theologian, he puts it very plainly. He says, "The narrative is not edifying in any conventional religious or moral sense." Yep. There is nothing good about anything that happens in this story, right? Esau lives for the moment. Jacob is a deceiver and a trickster, right? And we see that those character traits continue throughout. Okay, let's unpack it anyway. Let's see if we can figure out what the heck we might be able to get out of this. Let's kind of summarize the story again. Esau comes home from being out in the open country, says to Jacob, "I'm so hungry, give me some of that stew." And Jacob right? Sees an opportunity. He's like, oh, yeah, I'll give you some stew. You seem really hungry. Sell me your birthright. Now, what's the birthright? That's the right of primogeniture, right? The right to the inheritance, the right to all the blessings that come with being the firstborn. Now, what should Esau have said? He should have said, you're crazy. No, I'm not selling you my birthright for a bowl of stew. Are you kidding me? That is not what he says. He says, oh, I'm so hungry I could die. What good is my birthright if I'm dead? Yeah, take the birthright. I don't care. You can have, just give me some of that stew, right? And Jacob is no fool. He's like, okay, but swear it to me. Swear it on oath. Yeah, of course, I swear it. You can have the birthright. Next week, we'll find out exactly what he does to ultimately get the birthright, okay? But here, the bargain is made, right? And then it ends with this line, right? Esau eats the stew, we're told. He eats it, he gets up, and he goes away. And then it ends with this line. So Esau despised his birthright. In other words, he treated as worthless the thing that was the most valuable thing in his life. Right? Neither of these guys are good guys. Jacob is a liar. Esau is kind of stupid, right? I mean, there's nothing of value in this story that we can say, yeah, here's a model for how we should live in our lives. Okay, let's dig a little bit deeper into one part of the story, because there is something about this word red. It keeps showing up over and over again. Esau is born, and we're told that he's red when he's born. What does that mean? Well, maybe he had red hair, right? He was kind of hairy. Maybe he had red hair. Maybe there was blood. Maybe he had an unusually bright pink complexion when he was born. We don't know exactly, but he was red. Okay. Then we hear about the word that we hear red stew, right? The NIV translation says red stew. What's the connection there? All right. So the word for red in Hebrew is the word Adom, A-D-O-M, we would spell it. The word for stew is also Adom, right? So the same word for both of these, red and stew. We have words like this in English, right, where the same word has two different meanings. Ring can mean a piece of jewelry or can mean the sound that a bell makes, right? A bat is a flying mammal or, a baseball bat, a thing you hit a ball with. So we have these words in English too. Adom can mean red, it can mean stew. And we're told that he how does it put it? It says, quick, let me have some of that red stew. By the way, actually in Greek, it doesn't say red stew. That's the NIV translation's way of trying to help us make that connection. It's just stew. It's just stew, but it's the same word as red. And it's because of this that he's called Edom. That's his nickname, and it becomes the name of the nation that comes from him, the Edomites, the nation of Edom. And it also comes from Adom, right? So red. So he's born red. His nickname is red, and he eats stew, which is the same word as red, right? There's something here. From the moment that he's born, it's almost like the author is kind of shaking his head and saying, poor Esau. From the moment he was born, he was destined for nothing but stew, And by contrast, Jacob, scummy as he is, was destined for birthright. Now, again, right, there's nothing good or right about this. So why is it that Esau loses everything and Jacob gets everything? Is it because Jacob was so cunning, right, and deceptive? Or is it because God said, the older will serve the younger? And this is how it played out. This is how that became the truth. There are no easy answers with this story. There are no answers that we can come away with and say, I feel so good now about this story, right? Oh, yes, right? What we see happening, right, is that Esau, who was the firstborn, becomes like the last. Jacob, who was the lastborn, becomes like the first, right? Okay, so when we think about the world that we live in today, I said earlier we don't practice primogeniture, but we do kind of live in a world of primogeniture, right? Primogeniture basically says if you're firstborn, you get to have everything. You get all the opportunities, you get all the benefits, you get all the blessings, right? But it's not because of anything that you accomplished. It's just because of where you were born or when you were born. We do have something kind of like that. Like we would say, there are some people in the world who deserve the good things in life, right? And there's some people in the world that, not that they don't deserve it, but they don't really deserve the good things. They're okay with the bad things in life. And we would often base that on where they were born, maybe when they were born, who they were born to, right? How much money their family had, right? Maybe where they went to school, what city they live in, what country they live in, even what color or shade their skin is, or what language they speak, or how strong their accent is, right? We have these criteria by which we determine some deserve the good things and some don't, right? That's primogeniture. But just as God did with Jacob and Esau, where he flipped the conventions and the rules of the world upside down, right? That's still the God that this God is. God is a God who flips the rules of primogeniture upside down in whatever way we practice primogeniture. God does this throughout the Old Testament, right? He flips these rules upside down, the rules of primogeniture. I just wanted to show you that it is consistent of God's character and nature. The younger is always, I shouldn't say always, almost always elevated above the older. Abel, in the story of Cain and Abel, Abel is favored over Cain. Isaac is chosen rather than Ishmael. Joseph, who we'll learn about next year, is favored over Reuben. These are sons of Jacob. Moses, the younger brother, is called rather than Aaron, the older brother. David was the youngest of 8 sons, and God said, that's the one I'm choosing to be the king of Israel. And he becomes the ruler over all his brothers. God always flips our expectations upside down. God says, I don't play by your rules, earth, people, right? Jesus didn't use the words, the older will serve the younger. He put it a different way. Let me read to you some of the things that Jesus said. He said it over and over again. Matthew 19:30, Jesus said, but many who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first. Matthew 20:16, he said, so the last will be first and the first will be last. Mark 10:31, but many who are first will be last and the last first. Luke 13:30, indeed, there are those who are last who will be first and first who will be last. Right? Jesus over and over reminds us that this is how God operates in the world. God doesn't play by our rules, where the great and powerful stay in God's eyes, the great and the powerful. God sees those who are at the bottom. The Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians put it this way. He said, but God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. Right? So that no one may boast before him. When you look at Jacob, I mean, that guy is a mess, right? And he did not deserve the birthright, partly because he was kind of scummy about the way he got it, right? But primarily in terms of the world that they lived in, because he was a lowly and despised second-born son. Esau's the one who, according to the world, deserved the birthright. But really, he didn't deserve it either, right? I mean, he just happened to be born 2 minutes earlier. Right? And that's it, right? That's not deserving. But the world said, you get the birthright. And then God flipped the story upside down. Said, no, I don't play by those rules. God chose, right, the foolish things, as Paul puts it, the foolish things to shame the wise. Jacob was among the foolish things. Esau would have been considered among the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong, the lowly things of the world, the despised things, to shame the things that are high and mighty. because God flips things upside down. Okay. I think it's worth considering how that makes us feel. Like, do we like that idea? In some ways, we love those stories about, in movies and in novels and whatever, the little guy, overpowering the big guy, David and Goliath, those kinds of stories, right? But how do we feel, right? How do we really feel? Okay, if that's a reality of the world, how do we feel about that? And if we feel really good about it, my guess is that's probably because we identify with those who are last in the world. Maybe that's because we know some people who would be considered last in the world and we get it. Maybe we have had our own experiences of lastness when we've been sort of kicked to the side or kicked to the curb or overlooked or taken advantage of, right? Or maybe it's because we really are among the last of the world, the ones that the world would consider last, right? That's probably not most of us, right? Most of us were born into a place and a time and families where we had enough opportunity to, have a pretty decent life. So, does it make you excited to hear about first will be last and last will be first, or does it make you nervous? Sometimes it makes me kind of nervous, right? Because globally speaking, I would be in the first category, as would the rest of us, right? We're in that first category because we've had lots of opportunity. We've had, we've got homes and cars and all of this, right? We're doing okay. We're in that first category. So it makes me kind of nervous sometimes to think that the first will be last. I was talking with a friend of mine this week, Andrew Richards, who spoke here a year or two ago, did the Camino with me and Derek a few years ago, and he works for Open Doors, which works with a persecuted church. There are places in the world today where Christians are being killed because they are Christians, right? Certain countries in Africa right now where that's happening. And he, as we're talking about this, he was saying, I can't remember the exact words that he used, but he said, these are the ones that God looks at and says, now you are my faithful ones, right? The ones who are suffering, not because they, because of something else, but because of their faith, because they belong to Jesus. These are the last ones of the world. And anyway, this is a side note, but we talked about the importance of we who are the first in the world staying connected to those who are last, because we're all part of God's family, right? We're all followers of Jesus together. We're all part of the same church. Okay, so what do we do with, how do we feel about that? The concept of the first will be last and the last will be first. I think it's worth reflecting on that. How do we feel about that? And if we do feel uncomfortable with it, can we surrender and say, God, help me, give me experiences that I need, help me to identify with those who are last in the world. I also want to say that if you feel like you are one of the last ones, or if you've had that experience, right, this is good news. This is good news. Probably all of us have had experiences where you feel like, I just feel like I'm overlooked and nobody cares, right? The last will be first. That is good news. God does not ignore the last of the world. That is good news for us. Here's the other thing that I would invite. So pay attention to how you feel about this, but also pay attention to the messages of the world, right? Generally speaking, who does the world say deserves the good things, right? What kinds of people? What qualities? What do you see? All you got to do is watch the news, watch TV, watch movies, right? We can see who the world says. And who does the world tend to say does not deserve the good things of the world, does not deserve blessing, does not deserve respect and dignity, right? Who are the last ones according to the world? Right? What this story tells us, really what the scriptures tell us throughout, is that God does not play by those rules. And for us, who are members of God's family, we don't play by those rules either. Lord Jesus, thank you for this hard to understand story. This hard to like story. But thank you for the reminder that you don't play by our rules and that you don't ignore the ones that the world considers youngest or last. And that you love the oldest, you love the first, but they don't get more honor, more dignity because of that. We all are loved and have dignity in you just because we belong to you. Lord, help us to live in that reality. Help us to be encouraged and hopeful when we find ourselves in those places of lastness. And help us to love and support and encourage and take action on behalf of those in the world who find themselves in last place. Thank you that we get to participate with you in the overturning of these very human systems of this world. Help us to join you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.